From NJ.com and the Star Ledger, welcome to the Rutgers Rant, your one-stop podcast for the Scarlet Knights, with your hosts Steve Pikiell and Rutgers insiders Brian Fonseca and Pat Lenny. Let's start shopping.
All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Rant, a Selection Sunday snub edition of the Rutgers Rant. All right, we got a lot to talk about. We're going to break this thing down from every conceivable angle, answer all of your questions. I got to start with this, though. I woke up on Sunday morning and I thought they were in. I did. I thought they had done enough throughout the course of the season. I thought the Purdue win combined with the 10 quad 1, quad 2 wins was enough. And I thought the Big Ten tournament performance had eased up on the narrative that Rutgers didn't play well without Mawot Mag. I thought that would have helped. All that said, by no means is what happened last night stunning to me, because this is exactly what can happen when you leave your fate in the hands of the selection committee. And it happens every year. I've been watching Selection Sunday for a million years now. There's always a team that's in this position. It sucks that it's Rutgers, but that's what it is, Brian, right? I mean, this is just the reality of college basketball when you leave it in the hands of the committee.
Correct. Rutgers, for reasons we can get into later, I guess, effed around and found out. They left themselves vulnerable. And look, they had some bad fortune with a key player going down, right? But that can't be the reason you suddenly go from a team that's competing for, a top 3 finish in the Big Ten to losing every quad 3 game you play and blowing leads and playing like bottom 4 team in the Big Ten. They had no answer to Mawot Mag's injury. They had no depth to fill in for him. They had a non-conference schedule that really came back to bite them. It looked like they were going to be able to avoid that issue this season by just demolishing all the quad 4 opponents they played. But when you're, like you said, you're in the bubble and there's razor thin margins, as the NCAA Tournament Committee Chair Chris Reynolds said to Chris Mad Dog Russo on the radio yesterday, as much as they're looking for reasons to put you in, they are also looking for reasons to keep you out when you're at that stage of the bubble. And Rutgers, whether people choose to ignore it as much as they do or not, had plenty of reason not to be put into the committee. Brad Wachtel, bracketologist extraordinaire, was kind of hinting at that, leaving the breadcrumbs around Twitter the days leading up to the tournament. He explained why Rutgers wouldn't make it if they didn't make it, the many reasons. And in the end, that proved costly, that they weren't even the first team out of the field. They were the second team out of the field. So they weren't even as close to making the field as we thought they were.
Oklahoma State was the team ahead of them, right? Yeah. And all those teams, the teams that are right there in the bubble. And we've spent all this time like looking at Nevada, looking at NC State. This is what jumps out to me. All right. The last 4 teams in had a combined 4 quad 3 losses. Rutgers had for itself, right? I mean, believe me, I've fudged the metrics before. I'm pretty sure that's right. I mean, Pat, when you saw it, what was your first reaction? And was there a team when you're like, oh, come on? I mean, was there a moment when you're like, come on, they can't put Nevada in. You can't put Arizona State in. They've got a net ranking 66. You can't put it. I mean, was there a moment where you thought that?
I thought NC State was the one that was a real wow. And NC State had, I think, 0 quad 1 wins, or maybe one.
Yeah.
One did one. And I thought that one was a little shocking. But it just comes back to the same thing, and the chairman said it over and over again. Rutgers played poorly without Mawot Mag and the strength of schedule. They took the 2 criteria that Rutgers really lacked in and just hammered them with it. So I think compared to the other teams, like, that's what it comes down to. They looked at the most negative things they could possibly look at about Rutgers and just Steve Pikiell was pounding his cell phone. The committee was pounding Rutgers with these 2 poor pieces of criteria. That's what it comes down to.
What a sad fate, an unnecessary death for the cell phone, unfortunately. And I like this another thing I kept on saying, and I kept on writing, and people kind of thought I was the crazy old man who has a television set, that that the selection committee watched games, right? They watched games, and I have no doubt what happened. In my mind, there's no doubt that they watched, they saw what happened. They either saw the score, saw they lost to Minnesota, and then they were attuned. They were watching the Northwestern game. It was one of the few games on that night, Sunday night. And they saw what we saw. Everyone who was in the building at the rack on Sunday, left with that same kind of sickening feeling like, oh God, this looks like an NIT team. Just the way they played that game, just out of sync completely, lost to a team they were, right on the same level with them, didn't really compete well in that game, looked terrible offensively. And this quote right there, this quote from the selection committee guy in that interview with Mike and Mad Dog, we had several games we could observe them from February 7th on, and they had a difficult time. I mean, Brian is right. The eye test.
You don't even have to watch the games. The numbers speak for themselves. They lost. This is a team that lost 3 straight home games to end the year by double digits. One of them was to Nebraska, which, as much as you want to say they're playing well and that Kaisei Tominaga is electric, they're still the 12th place team in the Big Ten. It was to them by 12. You have one of the worst offensive performances possible against Michigan, a fellow bubble team, another team you're competing to enter the field with. And you blow a 10-point lead with 65 seconds to go against Minnesota. If you're on the bubble, that you need that game, you cannot lose that game. And you blow a 10-point lead in 65 seconds, you have no one to blame but yourselves to play that poorly for that long. And the other thing is that, one, like you said, there's a good sample size there. There's 10 games that they had without Mawot Mag, and he's not coming back. He's out for the year. This is what Rutgers is right now. So it's not the eye test. It's the numbers too. The numbers are horrendous. They had the 200th ranked offense nationally in efficiency in those 10 games. They played bad. It is what it is. I think it's a totally fair thing to hold against Rutgers. And listen, they all they had to do was win one quad 3 game, maybe win one game at home. Maybe, there's so many opportunities they had and they let it slip. Just go back to the non-conference schedule we can get into later, but they gave themselves no cushion by playing 7 quadrant 4 games. And, that's another thing.
Yeah, I mean, let's talk about that. The schedule thing is big. Go ahead, Pat. You were going to make a point?
Yeah, I just wanted to make one point about teams that got in over Rutgers, and this was pointed out by Aaron Brightman on Twitter, and I thought it was a really good point. He said the one comp to Rutgers that's kind of maddening is Providence. Their best non-conference win was beating Rider by 1 at home. They lost to Seton Hall by 24. Went 4-6 down the stretch. Played 11 Q4 games and went 4-8 in those, and 7-10 against quad 1 and 2. Providence was that one final team that got in as the number 11 seed, and Rutgers, that was the dagger, as you wrote, Steve. Right. So,
I made the note that, but I will say, and Providence along those lines had the 354th best non-conference schedule, which is 12 spots below Rutgers. The one thing I clearly that Providence, they had moved Providence out of that last 4 consideration, right? They had decided that Providence was higher ranked than Rutgers. NC State, the same thing. You can debate it, but when they were making the decision, they had moved on. They already had Providence ahead of those teams. I mean, I thought there was a good case. It was close. Again, it was close, but it comes back to that. All right, I want to talk about the non-conference because it was a huge topic. Steve Pikiell hates the question. He had to know it was coming last night, hated it was coming. It didn't come from us. Thank you, Ryan Dunleavy, for asking the question about the non-conference schedule. I get that they tried this schedule Gonzaga. I don't know the entire story there, that they were looking for upgrades. They didn't get it. And it's the similar schedule they've had the first 7 years of Steve Pikiell's there. I didn't get the sense that they were, like it was something, we're going to look at this, we're going to fix it. Brian, what was your takeaway from what Steve Pikiell said about the schedule? And I'm curious, was it as big a factor as a defining factor, or was it like a tie-breaking factor in this one?
So to be clear, the committee uses the net ranking of the non-conference schedule. I think the one you referenced was KenPom, and the net Providence is 289, which is almost 40 spots, almost 30 spots better. And another thing with Providence, they had the same amount of quad 1 wins as Rutgers, 4. They had 1 quad 3 loss and 0 quadrant 4 losses. So in 15 Q3 and Q4 games, they had 1 loss. Rutgers had 4 and 13. So Rutgers had more bad losses and less opportunities. And look, Providence
Rutgers also beat number 1 Purdue that we don't ever talk about.
Providence beat 3 top 20 teams in KenPom. They had good wins. They had as many good wins as Rutgers, although those 3 were at home. My point is we could debate all these things back and forth because these teams put themselves in that position. Rutgers should not have been in that position, especially because they were 16-7. They were second in the Big Ten. They had all those big wins, and they just completely imploded down the stretch. Non-conference schedule. The issue is that Rutgers had 8 games that it kind of chose. One of them, the Seton Hall game you play every year. The Miami game was contractually obligated by the league. But those eight games they picked, all of them were at home. And I believe all but one, I have those numbers up on the site in a story, all but one were quadrant 4 tomato cans that they destroyed by 35 points. I guess the committee isn't that impressed by a 40-point win over Columbia or a 35-point win over Coppin State. You got to play. Those games have so little upside and so much downside because Rutgers didn't lose. But what if they had a Lafayette loss? Then the season's over. Yes, the Gonzaga thing that ended up working out. The Rutgers had tried some variation of other. They were supposed to play Baylor, for example, the year, I believe, the year to COVID. Rutgers has tried, but they're not trying hard enough. And maybe there's a middle ground between playing the 314th ranked non-conference strength of schedule and playing, the 189th. Rutgers is one of the 2 teams in the Big Ten alongside Minnesota that didn't play in a holiday tournament or a multi-team event that featured another high major team. They're not getting themselves involved in these,
right.
I'm not saying they got to go to Bahamas or Maui or whatever. Go to Charlestown or go to, I don't know, somewhere and play someone tough on a neutral court. Steve Pikiell mentioned that when he was thanking the fans that they traveled to Chicago. I don't know if that's him laying the groundwork for maybe convincing one of these holiday tournaments to invite them. I have to imagine they've gotten invites since they've become better in recent years. I can't imagine they're outdrawing Nebraska basketball on the road or Penn State basketball on the road. But they got to get invited to one of these holiday tournaments. They got to make more of an effort to play high major teams. Steve Pikiell always mentions that teams don't want to come play in the RAC anymore, which is fine. Then go play them somewhere else, play them on a neutral court, do something to improve this. And from the sound of it, the way he responded yesterday didn't seem like he's particularly inclined. It seems like he's pretty ingrained in the idea that you can play 8 quadrant 4 teams, 7 quadrant 4 teams in the non-conference and still skate by. I think this season and last season, when they barely made it in, are pretty good. It's pretty good proof that you should probably schedule up, especially if you're Rutgers at the point they are in the rebuild.
Yeah. And it is not a factor if they beat Michigan in that last home game or Northwestern last home game or hold the lead against Minnesota, but they didn't. And so we're here and we're counting, we're just, you gave the selection committee a reason to go against you. This is the one thing. And let me tell me if you agree with this. The thing I think the biggest beef Rutgers can have for me is the Ohio State loss early on. There was it was supposed to be stapled, the fact that the refs blew that game. It was supposed to be stapled to the Rutgers' sheet, and it's supposed to be considered. And we thought it wasn't going to be treated as a win, but it wasn't going to be treated as a loss, and it would be a tiebreaker, Pat. Right? Like I don't think they looked at it at all. I mean, I don't think there's any evidence that.
It seems like it was just log jammed with the rest of their Big Ten slate going 10-10, whatever. So you're right. I think it was just the afterthought.
Yeah, and again, that was a bad break. That's one thing that certainly, if that game had been won, you certainly would look at maybe they're not in that position where you're debating whether or not they had a better record than Nevada. I mean, you might still be, but it's clear to me that wasn't considered. And the other thing, I will say this, like where the committee. The committee's uneven with the injury thing. It is. I mean, it's not. Yeah, it's just not. There's no steadfast rule like, well, when we look at every team that loses a player or every team that gets a player back, they're going to seed them differently. It is really just it's a crapshoot. And I think that when you say they used the Mawat Mag thing against Rutgers, if you look at some other places, that it wasn't quite the same steadfast rule that this team's playing differently with the injury. I get that. That's another thing that I think Rutgers can be unhappy about. Again, goes back to our big thing. And this is the other thing that's not getting talked about too. You want to put this on what happened in those last 6 games. Like we saw a different Rutgers team in the Big Ten tournament that we saw, but the committee wasn't watching. I guess the point I would make is it on Steve Pikiell for not making this adjustment sooner with Derek Simpson? I mean, clearly the team wasn't playing well when Mawat Meg went out. They had evidence to suggest that they had to do something. He waited 6 games. I mean, okay. So they found something, but they found it too late.
It's a great point. And to your bigger point, what happened to the conference tournament that it's so devalued now? I think that's such a miss by the committee that Rutgers really did turn it around in the Big Ten tournament and looked like a different team. But to your point, yeah, they it is on Pikiell a little bit not trusting his freshman in the spot and going with Andre Hyatt in the starting lineup over Simpson, because they did look like a different team, and Derek Simpson proved to be the scorer that they were missing all season long. So a little bit of both. I think like what I don't understand why the Big Ten tournament was devalued so much.
It's all the tournaments,
yeah, all tournaments, and why Pikiell waited so long to plug Derek Simpson. You're right on both points there.
And I guess we are talking to Jared Carino about this as we were leaving the rack after the Northwestern game. Like there's a pile of evidence that suggests that they don't look at the conference tournament anymore, Brian. I mean, that's just it. And I mean, look at where Duke is seated. You look at Texas A&M last year. You look at a lot of things when you're like, all right, well, they didn't watch this. They're not watching these.
Yeah, and we can argue the merits of that or not, but I think everyone was kind of aware of that reality coming in. So I think people misinterpreted a lot of things. For example, when Brad Wachtel said it was a play-out game, right? It meant that when Rutgers and Michigan played, the loser is out of contention, not that the winner is in the tournament, right? It just means you stay alive and you don't give the committee another reason to kick you out, or it gives you a chance to keep running. The Simpson thing, yes, maybe they wouldn't have scored at 0.75 points per possession against Northwestern or against Michigan. He shot 30% from the field in the Big Ten tournament. I get that the offense looks different and they actually move for a change when he's able to penetrate the paint with dribbling and it kind of opens things up, so to speak. They didn't turn into the Showtime Lakers with the kid.
They passed the eye test though. They look like a tournament team against Michigan and Purdue. They look like a different team.
Rutgers beat Michigan because its defense was significantly better, and Michigan was missing every shot they took in the second half. Rutgers missed 19 out of the last 25 shots in the first half. Rutgers was no offensive juggernaut against Michigan. They were better offensively against Purdue. I will give them that, obviously. But yeah, I don't buy the idea that Rutgers is suddenly looking like an infinitely better team with Derek Simpson, in the lineup. And even the Penn State, we can argue the second half of the Penn State game when they make that 19-point comeback. Yes, Rutgers was great offensively in that second half, and Penn State also missed every shot possible. So I'm not entirely sure I buy that if he makes this change earlier, the season is completely different. But I guess that's a what if that Steve Pikiell will have to live with for the rest of his coaching career, and Rutgers fans will have to kind of debate amongst themselves.
All right, so we do have news. We have the NIT. The NIT tomorrow night, 7:00 versus Hofstra, number one seed, one of the 4 number one seeds. Rutgers, to give them credit, and I get it. There was no way Rutgers was going to turn down the NIT, but my alma mater certainly didn't seem to mind about turning down the NIT. So I guess it's something you can do. Rutgers said, you know what, we're playing, we're in. That's good. Let's break it down. I mean, is there something? What do you expect to see from this team? And I guess that's my big question. The Hofsters are coming in. They're a team that's pretty good. Had the number one seed in their conference, didn't win the tournament. I don't know. I mean, this is the kind of thing where a team might come in here to the rack where Rutgers has not played well in weeks and have more motivation to win that game than a team like Rutgers that might have punched out for the NIT. I mean, Pat, which team do you think you're going to see here?
That's such a great question. I've been wondering what Rutgers team is going to show up every single game the last couple stretch because you just don't know. I think Rutgers the air is out of the balloon on this team. I feel like they know that they probably should have been their whole goal was to be in the NCAA tournament. I think that it was deflating that they didn't get in. I think they're going to be a little flat, but that still doesn't mean they can't beat Hofstra. I mean, come on.
Hofstra's good
and compete for the title. Yeah, of course Hofstra's good. Shout out Jay Wright. But yeah, you're right. I just think they are a little deflated. It was a gutting blow, and they're gonna have to find a way to get back in there, pick their energy back up.
Yeah. I guess what I'm curious about is how do you guys think the fans or fan base will react to this? They obviously have a home game. How many people do you think are going to show up? Do you think people are going to care? Is Rutgers now above the NIT where people kind of go meh?
That's going to be fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. Yeah, and I really do. I think if you put the over under at 5,000, I'm going to probably take the over, but not by much. I mean, I think it's still something to do. It's a Tuesday night though. No tickets are sold. There's not going to be a lot of excitement here, but Hofstra fans might travel. You can look at it that way. It's tough, but this is when the diehards show up. We're going to see how many fans were in bandwagoning it and how many are just absolutely, I am with this team, no matter where it goes. It's going to be a really good test of where the Rutgers fan base is right now. You're absolutely right.
I'm curious to see about the students because they were so gung-ho the whole season. How did the students show up for this game too?
Right.
They might be on spring break. I might be wrong there,
yeah,
but I
right.
think they're on
Oh,
spring break.
see, that's good point. That's going to be tough. That's going to make it hard. I wouldn't come back from Daytona Beach for Rutgers Hofstra in the first round of the NIT.
Speaking of Daytona, all I could think about in the past 12 hours is that song you kept singing to yourself on press row in Chicago, and I can't believe how right you were. I just didn't think this is the way you'd be right.
The I'm not going to Dayton song.
Yeah, sing it for the crowd. Give him a little sample.
I just can't sing. It's just a bad idea for me to sing on the
Fair
podcast.
enough, but it was
people. We have sponsors, Brian.
Sure, but for the people at Dace, it was I'm not going to Dayton to the tune of we're not going to take it, and it was just over and over and over. And I was like, Steve, you're being a little optimistic, and sure enough, I guess he was.
Yeah, it's good. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's what we do to entertain ourselves at the Big Ten tournament.
I wish I recorded it. That's my big regret.
That's your big regret.
Put it into the
Steve's second best song behind the Gettleman parody.
Right, Dave Gettleman. Yes, good memories. All right, do we want to take some insider questions here?
Do we have any other choice?
We don't. We have nothing else. Now, I'm not in the mood for true false. Let's just listen to what the people have to say. All right, so we got about 50 questions on the schedule. Can Fonseca explain? This is good. I'm glad they know who to go to for this question. Can Fonseca explain how you have a high net but a terrible strength of schedule? I assume the net is weighted average, where the strength of schedule is just a compilation of winning percentages. That's because of the margin of victory, correct?
No one really knows the formula for the net. They haven't never made it public. It's a lot about efficiency. 7 of Rutgers' 19 wins were against quadrant 4 teams. And yes, they beat them by an average of 35 points, just absolutely obliterated these poor low major teams. I'm not sure. I have to imagine there's some cap on, again, it's not that impressive to beat Columbia by 40 points. Like, it's just not. You probably should if you're a good high major team. So that's probably part of it. And the strength of schedule probably weighs it down. Now, why is Rutgers net 40? I have no idea. I don't know. I mean, it was 77 when they lost to Lafayette last year. I don't know, yeah. But to be clear, it's an organizing tool. It's not the end all be all. Which another thing about the net, which is so funny. Last year, no one cared about the net when Rutgers was the highest net to ever make the tournament. Yeah. And all of a sudden, when Rutgers was terrible to start the year, but had that hot start at the end of the year, suddenly the eye test and a hot finish was the most important thing possible. The committee needs to consider this. And now that Rutgers sputters to the end, all of a sudden, no, it's the whole body of work. I mean, the gymnastics that people go through to kind of justify, which, look, it's what the bubble is all about, but it's just really funny to see the same people have two completely different thought processes within 12 months of each other.
Right. And the net, yeah. And then the other thing, some of the teams, I get it, like Rutgers fans were most angry about Nevada being in. Well, Nevada, if they had been left out, they would have been left out. And I looked it up with they would have been the third highest net ever left out. And they had a 37 as a higher net than Rutgers. Again, this stuff is just... I could do this all day with these teams. Totally get it. All right, more questions. This is one of my favorite topics on Twitter last night. Dan in Lawrenceville. To me, it seems like Rutgers gets little respect from the Big Ten or from the committee, and the committee is nothing more than a bunch of administrators, as noted by Politi, who make decisions based on personal beliefs, biases, and use statistics to justify their beliefs, as opposed to using statistics to make their decisions. That was the one comment. Another one I got on Twitter last night that I tweeted out. I try to resist getting in there and having fights with people, but it's just about how, that the fans, essentially the administrators have looked at the Rutgers in a certain way, and it's just never going to happen until this generation of people die off. And I was like, whoa, we need the Grim Reaper to solve. We need the Grim Reaper himself to come down and solve the Rutgers perception problem. I'm going to ask you, Pat, you are a Rutgers graduate. You have seen this. You know the RU screw.
I was going to say, I totally agree.
You totally agree. I totally
agree that there is a stigma out there about Rutgers. They see Rutgers and they go, what is a Rutgers? I think that is still
that is really 50 years old. That is older than me.
There's just this perception. Even when you go to Rutgers has always been the punchline. It always will be the punchline. Rutgers doesn't have a rival in the Big Ten. Like, it's just truly feels still like there's always going to be a stigma about Rutgers.
All right. All that said, this is good. I'm glad you're taking up for the fans, because I do think a lot of people feel this way. All that said, did that have anything to do with them being left out of the NCAA tournament? Anything at all?
I would pray that it has nothing to do with it, but the the Rutgers in me knows that there is an RU screw in there. It just has to be. Even Chris Mad Dog Russo knows about the RU screw. So, but yeah, it can't be. It can't be. But there is that little just. Maybe it's just being from New Jersey. Maybe it's just from being from New Jersey. You know how everyone's perception of New Jersey is too.
But now we're at this point now where every time something bad happens, there's someone going, it's Rutgers. There's always happens every time something bad happens. Like, the ref screwed us. It's Rutgers. Oh, the ref screwed it because he just missed the call. I mean, I don't know, Brian.
The Rutgers ethos it has really become a victimization. Things always happen to Rutgers. It's not Rutgers' fault that they played a terrible non-conference schedule and lost all those games. It's because the Big Ten hates them and they're biased against them and the RU screw and all this. Like sometimes you mess up, sometimes things don't go your way.
Yeah.
There's no grand conspiracy here against Rutgers. It's not the Big Ten's fault that Rutgers blew, again, a 10-point lead with 65 seconds to go against the worst team in the Big Ten that lost 12 straight games and had not won at home since that game. Okay. It's not, there's no, the referees aren't looking at the schedule and saying, oh my God, it's Rutgers. I got a directive from Commissioner Warren. I got to screw these guys.
Right. It seems like Rutgers gets little respect from the Big Ten except when the time that Jim Delaney came and invited them to the Big Ten. It was pretty respectful.
Right. And the NCAA Tournament Committee disrespects Rutgers so much, except that time that they invited them in to the tournament with the highest net ranking in the history of the tournament. When they invited them in, despite the fact they lost at home to Lafayette.
Listen, they screwed Adam Korsak out of the Ray Guy Award.
Luckily,
they solved that out of pure spite. They gave it to him.
That's it.
We could go on, but I'll just leave it at that.
That's the best part. That's the best piece of evidence we've got. The Guy Award. That's it. You've convinced me. Ray Guy. Oh man, I love it. All right, so that's a great topic, though. I mean, every time it comes up, I just, yeah. All right. Another question: was the season a success or failure? It felt like coming into this year was a rebuilding year after losing Harper and Baker, arguably our two best players. So to even be on the bubble, it feels like a success. I mean, it's failure is a tough word, but success is not. That I'm not going there either. I mean, you still had what, the second or third best center in the league. You had the best defensive player in the league. You had a 4-year starting point guard. I mean,
best dunker. Don't forget the best dunker, which apparently did not impress the committee.
I guess not. Brian, are you calling it a failure?
I love this question. I think it's probably the bigger question of the entire season. Before, like you said, before the season, I think people would have done backflips if Rutgers made the NCAA tournament, and they would have gladly accepted an NIT number 1 seed. Things change as there's more data, as we get evidence of what this team is. Because in the preseason, we're all just kind of guessing. Oh, they'd have no one to replace Geo Baker and Ron Harper. Oh, they got no one from the portal aside from Cam Spencer. Are people going to develop? There's all these questions. When those questions are answered with yes, when they're 16-7 in January, when they're 8-4 and have the easiest schedule in the conference remaining, when you play Minnesota twice, you play Nebraska, you have all these, there's a legitimate path for you to compete for a Big Ten title. When you're at that point and then you don't make the tournament, I think it is the nice way to put it is an extreme disappointment. Failure, I agree with you. I'm tempted to use that word. It does seem a bit harsh. It's not good. I think this season, the way it unfolded, is one of the worst collapses in program history. I think that's fair to say. This is very 2004-esque, might be even worse than that. It's not good. I think if people want to spin it positively, there's ways to do so. I just can't shake the feeling that this was, for Rutgers, an incredibly disappointing season that it's going to stick in their craw for forever from here.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would look at it though. If you were to back up the plane to 35,000 feet and look down on it, back-to-back NCAAs, NIT. Now, I guess what matters is what happens next, Pat. I guess that's, to me, how you're going to view this. Are you going to view this as a blip on the? All right, so we got, and you could say, well, we lost Moab Mag, and we would have been in for another year, but we weren't. I mean, you're going to look at this as a blip, or you're going to look at it as this a turning point? I guess that's where I come back to.
Yeah, time will tell, I guess, is the answer to that question. But I was going to say, to bring this back to another football point, Steve, how does this feel compared to after beating Louisville and losing to West Virginia? The highs and the ultimate lows is kind of what I come back to. It's just like a as usual with Rutgers, a complete roller coaster.
Right. I mean, that wasn't Are You Screw, that one, at least. That was a screw. At least they did get, I mean, to go from, the Big East Bowls were so bad, you go from the Orange Bowl to, the freaking Texas Bowl. I mean, that was the Rutgers fans can complain about that for the rest of the time. They'll be right. I guess that it is on the same level a bit, but people do, the difference is I think people do look back on that year as very fondly, and they always will. I'm not sure they're going to, look back on this as even with the highs, and this team did create some really good moments for the fan base. I think Brian's probably right. You're going to look at this. It's all right. It just wasn't the season we thought it was going to be.
The season it could have been. And again,
it could have been. Exactly.
It was out of their once Mag got hurt, that was a major blow that I don't think anyone really grasped how important he was. But yeah, I just think that, in January I was talking about a second weekend team. We were discussing legitimately if they were going to see this team in Madison Square Garden in the Sweet 16, which from there, who knows what you can do, right? And just to go to a point where they're playing Hofstra in the first round of the NIT is just a major fall from grace. So, and to your point, moving forward, I don't think this impacts recruiting, as I've seen a few people really worried. I don't.
So next question. Yep.
I don't think this is going to cost them any recruits really, or a chance at any other recruits. I would be shocked. I think recruits have a much. They look ahead to where they're going to be. I think this coaching staff can really spin everything that happened here to kind of dissuade any concerns. Now the key here is how will they attack the portal in the offseason, who they will lose from the roster, or I guess gain addition by subtraction from the roster, and how will they fill depth? Because as we've seen this season, lack of depth absolutely killed this team. And while Steve Pikiell and most coaches don't like to go, 13 scholarships deep, obviously, I do think there is some merit to having a bit of a deeper rotation, more talent, and less developmental aspects of the roster.
I do wonder, and this is another question that someone asked, so it's a good transition. I do wonder how this will impact the current team's recruiting. I mean, this part of recruiting as a college coach now is you're recruiting your own players. If you had to guess right now, what does this starting five look like? And let's do it in order of, this would be a fun exercise. See if we can pull this off in order of dead solid certainty that the player is going to be in the starting five. I'll start Derek Simpson. I could pencil him in as your point guard. Are you going to put Paul Mulcahy in? Do you think he comes back? Does Cliff come back?
The way Pikiell keeps talking about Paul Mulcahy seems like he's not coming back.
I get that feeling too. I get the feeling some of these guys, sometimes you're just done with the college thing. I think Cliff entered this season thinking it was his last season. I don't know that it would have changed his mind. I think what's going to happen is the same thing what happened to Caleb. He's going to go look at the situation to see get a feel for where he is professionally and make a decision based on that. I think they're both 50-50. I think the freshman kid you could pencil him into the starting five. I think Cam Spencer.
I would say Cam Spencer is like the stone cold lock.
He's the stone cold lock.
He's their best offensive player. Like it's not even close. Yeah. So I would say Cam Spencer for sure. I'm not sure about Derek Simpson. I mean, probably he's the odds-on favorite to start at point guard.
I think at this point,
maybe you go get a veteran guard in the portal, another guy who can actually penetrate the paint, attack the rack. Because he can't be the only guy on the roster that can do that again. Because you're just spinning your wheels at that point. Mawat Mag, I think is another lock.
But is he going to be completely healthy at the start of the year?
I don't think I'm not entirely certain he'll be fully healthy in November. I think he'll be able to play basketball in November. These things are generally at this point 9-month recovery, 6 to 9 months. I think you probably ease him in when you play Coppin State and Columbia and Long Island University in November. So there's no point.
I love you, Brian. One thing about you is when you make a point, you make it and move on. That's the great part. There's no,
Yeah, of course. Why would I linger on the fact that Rutgers keeps playing these tomato cans? And
you've got the same hammer. You bring the same hammer to the podcast that Steve Pikiell brought to his phone. That's the good part about you.
No, that's what I do. So thankfully, I don't have to buy another hammer or another phone. But yes, so when they're playing those tomato cans, they don't really have to rush him back. My understanding is that he should be when the games start mattering. I think he'd be good to go. So to Cam Spencer, Mawat Mag, I think are stone cold locks to start. Yep. I think Derek Simpson is a good shot. I think they should get another point guard in the portal. Who knows how they do that? I think Pikiell has shown he trusts or prefers to develop guys that in his system than to go cherry pick other guys. Cliff, I'm fascinated by Cliff. I think a very interesting situation. I think there's a real possibility he stays, and I don't know. I wouldn't bet on it either way.
He does love it here. I will say that he does. He really likes going. He likes being at Rutgers. Likes being in college. I mean, I don't think that's not a debate.
Sure. They have some NIL stuff to figure out, obviously, because he can't make money. And I don't know. I don't think money is a huge thing for him. I think he's all right with that. But I think, that's got to be a factor, right? Also, I mean, he developed a significant amount defensively in his time here. He hasn't developed that much offensively. I wonder if that plays into a factor in his decision. Paul Mulcahy, who knows? I think it's an enigma what's going on there. I would not be surprised if anything happens. If he retires from basketball altogether, if he transfers, if he comes back, I wouldn't be surprised if anything happens. I'm not saying that I believe any scenario more than the other. I'm just saying I'm confounded by the whole thing. And who else?
Is there anybody on this bench who hasn't been playing? Because this is the thing that a lot of people have said. And I totally agree that this was an opportunity for somebody to come off this bench, and I guess it was Simpson, but he was playing. But but Pikiell didn't trust any of these guys. Joel didn't trust any of these guys we saw with Jalen Miller. I love the kid. He airballed 2 3-pointers in that game. I'm just trying who else on that bench is going to step in.
So the troll thing is a bit separate. I don't think he hasn't played since November. I think that there's either a redshirt attempt or something. Yeah, something like that. But yeah, Jalen Miller, bless his heart, tries really hard, is an absolute zero on offense and just cannot play in the Big Ten. I think that's been proven. I think he will move on and go play somewhere that's more of his level. I think Dean Reber's very disappointing season after what was a pretty decent season last year. I have to think that he is a candidate to move on and dominate in some mid-major league in North Carolina. I think Oscar Palmquist had his opportunities, and while he had some decent games, he had some big misses against Purdue, and I think he walked on senior day.
He did walk on senior day. Yep.
I think there's an opportunity there for him to spend his last 2 years of eligibility somewhere else.
He's got 2 years left? I didn't realize.
It's 2 years left. Yep. Look, does Andre Hyatt want to come back, or he'll be a graduate student? He'll have 1 more year of eligibility. He could transfer without any penalty. Does he want to, move on to greener pastures and give it somewhere else? That's
so many
possible.
questions, man. Yeah. Wow.
So look, college basketball now with the transfer portal is a year-by-year thing. The rosters are constantly fluid, and you never know, which is why you got to look at every season as an individual capsule. And again, not to belabor the point, but that's why this season will feel so disappointing, because this group will almost certainly not be the exact same next year. They won't be, because Caleb McConnell's graduating. And you move on to the roster next season. So a lot of moving parts that I'm fascinated to see how they all work out in the next month or so. Oh, and you got to consider also freshmen that are coming in. JaMychal Davis probably is going to play. Baye Ndongo is just ripping up the New England prep scene. He's playing great. I don't know if he'll play much, but I think he has a chance of being really good down the line. So maybe he can be a factor. And Antoine Woolfolk, not bad.
Woolfolk, yeah.
Really
he's
impressed.
a 10-minute. There's 10 minutes for him someplace if he develops a little bit. Yeah.
I was really impressed with him in the big, really, really impressed with how much better offensively he was and how little he fouled. So very encouraging 2-game stretch from him too.
2 things that made me think about Brian. One, it was like, wow, this feels like a St. Peter's level diaspora of the Rutgers roster, the way you just laid it out. And 2, if John Rothstein was going to come up with a catchphrase for you, it would be smashing tomato cans, Brian Fonseca.
I love it. I'm going to get that printed on a t-shirt.
Exactly. Put on a t-shirt and I'll buy one, but that's probably going to be the only one you sell. All right. That was a good breakdown. In other words, we simply can't do it. It's just amazing to me. I mean, I get it. It's college basketball in 2023, but I mean, other than 4 guys, we can't tell you at all who's going to be on this team, who's going to start for this team. It's wild. All right, let me see if there's any other questions, and then we can get to wrestling. That's just about it, I guess. One guy took a shot at me that says, Politi, your last article is a quad 4 loss, a pathetically weak finish to a generally good season. Podcast question, how does it feel to come up short in a big moment? Thank you, Bill. I feel, I guess, okay, I'll take it. I'll take the heat. And CJ in the Baskin Ridge, you want to end the questions with this. On a lighter side, to break up the stress of the snub, who's the funniest player on the Rutgers team? Funniest coach? Okay, come on, let's do a little lighter side question, CJ. Thank you for breaking it up. Who's the funniest guy? Cliff. Cliff makes me laugh every time. I think he's a hoot. Brian, you got someone?
Steve Pikiell has a great personality when you talk to him, away from cameras and stuff. I think he's sneaky funny. He gets along with people very well, and he always has a great one-liner in situations. I'm trying to think on the team off the top of my head. Caleb's always joking around. He seems like he's He's got some funny lines.
Yeah.
I'll go with Caleb.
Okay, there you go. All right. Thank you, CJ, for letting us break up. All right, Pat, we've been waiting now for 2 weeks here for you to talk some wrestling.
Where do you want me to begin,
I don't
Mr.
know.
Politi?
I have no freaking clue. Begin wherever
Great column on Jay Lahan, by the way. Down in AC. Very well written. Very well written.
Forgot about that.
You get a big wrestling shout out for that one if people caught that one. I hope they did.
Yeah.
Okay, Rutgers wrestling. Gonna be a really tough NCAA tournament with the way they were seeded. Their highest seed is like a 13, Dean Peterson at 125. So to get someone to finish in the top 8 is going to be really difficult. We got a press conference with Goodale coming up, so I'm really curious to see what he thinks about the seeding process and where this team stands heading into the NCAA tournament. They've had 9 consecutive seasons with an All-American. That's people finishing within the top 8 in their weight class. It's going to be realistically really tough unless someone gets really hot at the right moment to finish someone in that standing. So I don't know. If you put me on the spot, if you did a true or false right now, if Rutgers is going to have an All-American in wrestling, I would probably say false. And that's not to be a Debbie Downer. It's just the reality of where they're seated and things like that. So I think it's going to be a really tough, really tough NCAA tournament. But they did prove at the Big Tens after a horrible start that they were able to bounce back and really wrestle really well in tough moments. So maybe that happens again.
Who's the best shot?
You'd actually go with one of the 2 freshmen. That's Dean Peterson, who's number 13 seed at 125, and Brian Soldano, who had the best finish at the Big Tens. He finished 6th at 184. So I'd say one of those 2. And it's encouraging that they're freshmen.
Right. All right. And Goodale, he's kind of okay with it. What is the long-term prognosis? I guess the bigger question, when you're looking at what's going to be a disappointment, like you just told me it's going to be a disappointing NCAA tournament. I mean, is the bigger picture thing here that he's got to go to the transfer portal? I mean, what?
It's funny that you say that because there are a lot of Jersey guys that are going to do really well at this tournament that have extra years of eligibility that could be potential grad transfer targets. Talking Shane Griffith out of Stanford, Makai Lewis at Virginia Tech, they're NCAA champions that could be good targets for Goody. So if he gets one of those 2 guys, it's like holy cow, that's amazing. The long-term prognosis is that everyone on this team has an extra year, can come back if they want to come back. It's kind of the same thing as basketball, where a few of the guys may be done. Injuries have really prolong their career longer than expected. So the long-term prognosis is that they should be better the next couple of years. And they're really building something good.
Gotcha. Okay. Well, good.
As opposed to the fans that are now like, we need to fire Goodell and start over.
That's Casey.
This is over. Like, they're horrible. So I think just be patient. I think that this may just be a little blip.
Patience here. All right. Is there anything else we have to talk about? I mean, we have plenty of time to do lacrosse, baseball, and softball.
Yes, a couple things. One, I'll pass along Lanny's compliments to you. I'll give one to Lanny. Your story on Jordan Pagano was awesome. Incredible.
Whoa, it's a great point. Thank you for bringing it up.
Pagano.
Yes. Tell that story. If people didn't see that, I got lost in the March Madness thing. But what an incredible story.
Yeah, Jordan Pagano is a former Rutgers wrestler who's now in the the Scarlet Knights wrestling club. It's like a development kind of program that is for Olympic development, things like that. And he volunteers as a coach on the side, and he's an administrative assistant. So basically what that all means is that he's in the room every day working with the kids, and he's practicing with the kids, and he's wrestling with Billy Janzer, the 197 pounder, and gets put in a cradle inside wrestling, right? Kind of looks like a headlock a little bit for those that don't know. And all of a sudden his body just goes completely limp. And and then that's when the panic sets in. Billy Janzer's like, dude, what, are you okay? Are you okay? He's like, I can't move. And he's completely paralyzed, laying on the mat. And shout out to the Rutgers medical staff and trainer John Taggart. They did a tremendous job to stabilize him in the moment, make sure, he basically broke his neck, but it didn't sever his spinal cord. He just had a couple discs pressing against his spinal cord. He was paralyzed for about 45 minutes on his way to the hospital, and then started getting feeling back. And it was just this incredible recovery story that thankfully this kid is completely fine from what could have been a really tragic situation.
Man, that is scary. That is scary. And is he back with the team, or is he around the team?
He's still around the team, yeah. And he actually coached Bergen Catholic too when they were in AC. So it was about a month after being completely paralyzed. He was back in the corner coaching.
Crazy. All right, that is a good news story. And if you hadn't read it, go dig it up on NJ.com. It was a fantastic read.
One more thing.
Second. Yep.
Yes. I know you said we have time to talk about baseball, but I do want to give a shout out. They had their first 9-inning no-hitter, the 6th no-hitter in program history this weekend against Georgia Southern. It was a combined no-hitter. Takes away some of that shine for the old school baseball heads that like to see, one guy throw a no-hitter, but pretty cool for a program that's been struggling to start the season. Maybe this is the turning point for them. So that was one positive to come out of Rutgers athletics. And
lacrosse beat Princeton, right? Didn't that happen?
Lacrosse beat Princeton in overtime. They did. That's a good point too. All right, two positives to come out of another program at Rutgers that decides to play Princeton. I wonder,
a little bit different.
It's a little bit different. It's a little bit of the same too. I mean, look, you talk about improving a non-conference schedule. To bring up a different topic, you want to improve your non-conference schedule. There's a pretty good team down the road that would only have to come up 40 minutes. So that's just a suggestion on my part. That's all.
An NCAA tournament bound team.
Correct.
If next year he just comes back and it's just like Alabama and UCLA, and it's just gonna go completely in the opposite direction. Just slap it on the table in front of Fun Seconds. There you go.
He showed me
tomato cans.
No tomato cans here.
Oh yeah, he'd show me by doing. He'd sure show me by doing exactly what I'm asking him to do. Yes. And look, if you go 0-5 against Alabama, UCLA, Houston, Gonzaga, and Baylor, that's better than going 7-0 against Coppin State, Bucknell, Sacred Heart, Columbia. I'm just saying.
Just rattling them off.
For the resume and for the fans and for the sport. I think fans would infinitely prefer watching those games. Again, it amazes me, honestly. I guess one credit to them is that they're able to get 6,000 people at the rack to watch these terrible teams.
Central Connecticut State on a Tuesday before Christmas. Yeah, I hear you.
8:30, 2 days before Christmas. Yes, they got 4,000 or 5,000 people or whatever. That's pretty impressive. I just think it would be better if they played actual teams of their level, because if they want to be considered a top high major basketball team, which they're developing into, I think it's time to kind of schedule like you're one.
All right, let's sign off on that note. Again, disappointing Sunday. I think, speaking for all of us, I love covering the NCAA tournament. I am sad that we won't be able to do it this year. A tough moment for the basketball team, NIT. Maybe we'll see you at the rack. If not, we'll be back here on the podcast to talk it all over. Thanks for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Rutgers Rant. To participate in the conversation and receive live updates about the Scarlet Knights directly to your phone, sign up at NJ.com/insider.